Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. Our presentation is the impact of ePortfolios on student learning and accelerated writing programs. We've been fortunate to have two IITG awards. Our first year, it was a collaboration with two colleges. We've expanded that collaboration to include 4 community colleges: Genesee, Rockland, Sullivan, and Westchester Community College. And we also, from Rockland, have the director of our Liberty Partnership who's been collaborating with us. So those are our titles. I'm Martha Rotman. I'm chair of the Humanities, Social, and Behavioral Sciences Division from Rockland. Most of you probably know what ePortfolios are. They've been around for a long time. We've experimented with them at Rockland in many different ways, but especially in the English department. Basically, they provide a vehicle for collection of student writing. They document student learning over time. We found that they enhance student writing ability, they promote student reflection, and they increase student agency. Are some of you familiar with ALP? Anybody here? It's an accelerated learning program developed by Baltimore County Community College. We began in 2013, just experimenting. We offered 4 ALP classes, and by 2015, we had scaled up to offer 25 ALP classes. We found they've been very, very effective. Basically, students who place into developmental English have the opportunity to take college-level writing with a 2-credit support module.
Yeah, do you want to do study design? Yeah, oh, hi. Hi, good morning. I'm Stephen Burke. I'm the chair of English at Rockland Community College. So this was our original IITG study grant. We know that based on good research that the ALP model has been shown nationally based on CCRC, several studies that they did, a 1-year study and a longitudinal study, that the ALP model has been shown to move students ahead at a much quicker pace than students starting in developmental writing and then trying to move ahead of it. We also know that there's lots of good studies that the ePortfolios have demonstrated an ability to do a number of very important things: to document student learning, to demonstrate student assimilation of prior learning, to help writers interact successfully with a variety of different audiences, to help students think critically, and really to regulate their learning and to advance what they're doing. And we know that particularly in the writing classes, there's been lots of excellent studies on ePortfolios. What hadn't been done before, and what our study looked at, with first 2 years, the first year was Rockland and one of Sullivan Community College looked at it. The results were sufficient enough. We went back to IITG, said we'd like to continue this study. We then incorporated Genesee Community College, and we also included Westchester Community College. We said we really want to expand this and see that the results seem to be quite promising. We want to see how we expand it. So let me look at a couple of results with you, first of Sullivan and then of Rockland. Thank you. So we already talked about the ALP program. So we've scaled it up significantly at RCC, and it's been California has a California remediation project, which is pretty much based on the Baltimore project as well, and they're showing excellent results as well. Portfolios, we talked about that. You guys know portfolios. Oops, I'm going backwards. Here we go. So here's the Sullivan numbers. This was in the fall of 2015. They were showing, again, the small numbers. They had about 20 students in the pilot program. They had about a 70% pass rate of these students. So these are students who are now accelerating into college level. They place below a college level, but they're now taking the college level with an adjunct class. They had a 70% pass rate. It was pretty much approximately the same rate as the students without employing ePortfolios. So they really weren't able to document it. One thing that the Sullivan faculty have let me know is that they're using they used about 3 different ePortfolio models as well, and they did have some technical difficulties with it. It was a little bit improved. They had in the first year of the program, they had about a 50% pass rate, which was a little bit underneath their pass rate as well. So they're actually they're on an upward arc in terms of the pass rate, but they haven't been able to demonstrate any really significant impact to date of the ePortfolios. So here's some data I want to go into, and thanks to my IR director who helped me dig into this data a little bit. If you look at, this is the 2014 and the 2015 results at RCC. We've noticed the success rate, and at RCC we were considering in this project success rate of getting a grade of C- or above. Students who used, in the accelerated class, who used ePortfolios in both years had a higher success rate, 83 versus 79% this year, 71 versus 69% in the previous year. So we find that particularly encouraging. What's also interesting, though, is that these same students, if you look at their GPA, they have a lower GPA. So the students, and in both years that's absolutely true. So students with the lower GPA overall, the weaker academically students by our general measure, are succeeding at a higher rate with the one addition of an ePortfolio in their program as well. And we also know that their retention is similar for both the students in the portfolio or not using portfolio as well. We wanted to look at one more piece of data as well, and that is what happens to these students in the subsequent course. Do they get a tailwind? And interestingly enough, they do not. If you look at the ePortfolio students, the 2014 students, they're succeeding in their following course, which is our English 102 course, at a 78%. It will be 89% for students in the control group, 50% this year versus 77%, a major gap as well. Once again, we see that they have lower GPAs. What this tells me, however, is that these students, and I'm going to go back to my faculty and share this data with the entire writing faculty as well. These students might be succeeding at a higher level if they use ePortfolios, because that is the one thing that's not different. In the 102 classes, pretty much none of our faculty are currently using ePortfolios. And based on the success of the 101 classes, we really believe that with the inclusion of an ePortfolio, as part of their academic activities in the classes, they will be succeeding at a higher level. So I find these results quite promising for using ePortfolios. Yes? I'm sorry, sure. So your ePortfolio in 2015, 50%? Yeah, well, this is in the subsequent class. This is right now, this is looking at the next class. So the students who pass out of the 101 class take the 102 class. But in the 102 class, they're not using ePortfolios. And whereas in the 101 class, with the inclusion of ePortfolios, these students are succeeding at a higher rate than the control. In the 102, it's a lower rate than control. Yes? Are students getting additional support for the materials in ePortfolios? Would that be the reason for the success rate being higher when you're using them? Well, we compared them to students. All of the students in the accelerated, the ALP program, get additional support. They don't get any, just as part of that additional support, some students were working ePortfolios and some students were not. So they didn't get, so it's really just the ePortfolio activity that was the difference between the two, between the control class and between the test class as well. So let's look at some more information. Janelle, you're going to go.
So I'm Janelle Therese, and I'm from Genesee Community College, halfway between Rochester and Buffalo. And we have just begun this past year doing the accelerated learning program. Started with 1 class, and we now have moved up to 4. And what we found is with the ePortfolio, the classes that are using it, students are more engaged, and they also have a lot more input into their writing process. And one of our major SLOs for English 101 is that students can demonstrate the writing process and use the writing process again. And we're hoping that that will help them as they go on to English 102 or English 105 in the next levels to always be improving their writing. We use Blackboard, the journal part of Blackboard. We're kind of very low tech in this, but it's what's working best for us at this moment. And you can do an ePortfolio with many different types of programs, but you can also do it on the cheap with the journal section of Blackboard, which I think everybody has access to. So, thank you.
Am I actually next, Stephen?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ricky Werner from SUNY Westchester Community College, just to the east of Rockland. And we joined this initiative, this project, a year later. So we're still in the stages of launching. And we actually had a gap year, I like to call it, in our accelerated program. So the funding for that went away, but it's coming back for this coming year. So we weren't able to do it this year. But instead we offered what we did was we did a faculty learning, PD, professional development community, where we sort of spent the year thinking about some of the questions which we wanted to grapple with, and thinking about what could be the place of the ePortfolio in the accelerated learning program, and what are the things that it articulates to institution-wide. And so some of the questions which I thought were good to think about from our experience of trying to launch this thing are here. And so one of the things that we talked a lot about this year are what are the advantages of commercial ePortfolio platforms versus free online publishing platforms, and piggybacking on Janelle, I guess using the whatever software packages your institution is already using. I believe, Janelle, you said that you guys are using the Blackboard, using something integrated into Blackboard. I was big in favor of going with free online publishing platforms. You can use things like Google Documents or Google Sites or WordPress to create something that looks a lot like an ePortfolio and has the functionality, but there may be more sort of technological literacy which the students have to learn in order to do that, because it's not a dedicated tool. So it's really, for me, it was I tended to favor that, but the other faculty in our program tended to favor going with the commercial platforms like a Digication or TaskStream, which are dedicated ePortfolio platforms. If you go that way, probably there's less instruction that has to go on around the ePortfolio itself, both for the students and the instructors who are going to be teaching ePortfolios. But then it's a question of, do you want that instruction to be part of your class? Is it a good thing that you're teaching these students how to use these platforms on their own? So that's something that we talked about all year long. We're going to be actually running with a commercial ePortfolio platform for reasons I'm going to go to in a minute. Which actually dovetails nicely with the next question. This is not something I had ever thought about before this semester, but it came up as we tried to launch. Will the ePortfolio platform feed into your institution's assessment platform? Does anybody's institution use TaskStream or Digication for assessment purposes? Yeah, okay. So I'm just learning about this over the last semester. This seems to be a more and more of a thing where your institution may purchase assessment software to track students' progress, learning outcomes, and things like that. And so we had been, I had been talking a lot with Digication about piloting ePortfolios, but as I did that, my administration, my dean, keyed me into the fact that they had the administration had purchased TaskStream, which is a big assessment package, and that TaskStream had an ePortfolio that fed into its assessment, and that Digication could also be used. Also has those same functionalities. So both of those are two of the bigger ones, and they're both ePortfolios, so they work on the student end and the instructor end, but then they also aggregate data for the administrative end and for things like program review. And so the ePortfolio ends up plugging into all kinds of things which I didn't know that it could plug into and which offer interesting possibilities. But also then the question became, do we want it to plug into the assessment end? You know, I don't think I think if you are fighting assessment overall, you're probably going to have a losing battle. But I think it is good to be critical of when you're aggregating student work, when you're using it, when it's being plugged into purposes other than its original intended use, to at least pause and think about whether that's something you want, or whether you might want to have students create something on a free online platform that won't necessarily plug into other institutional initiatives, agendas, things like that. And I think I sort of covered some of this stuff, but I think the additional layer to the sort of concerns I was just talking about, you know, as much as you want to think about, do you want your students' work to automatically plug into other things? The other question is, how public do you want should student writing be? So part of the ePortfolio pedagogy is that it's valuable to have students write for public audiences and to think about public audiences. But I think with the accelerated program, there's the additional layer to thinking about if these are going public automatically or semi-automatically, how public do you want this writing to be? Especially considering that these are first-year students and they're tagged as developmental students, even though that the accelerated program sort of troubles that boundary a little bit. Who should be able to view students' writing in what context for how long? Things like Digication give lots of controls for these, and you can customize them, much like you can customize Facebook. But if students aren't thinking about that, they may not want that. And then you want to think about how long do you what kinds of writing do you as an institution want out there representing your institution? How long do you want it to be out there? One thing I've talked about with other departments, like the art department has said, sometimes they regret going with ePortfolios because, you know, there's work out there that they don't feel is of sufficient quality to have our name on it. You know, and I don't know that that's necessarily an attitude that I would hold, but it's something that's worth, I think, thinking about. And those are the big questions that I wanted to present for now. And thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is David Kendall. I'm also from Rockland Community College. I'm the director of the Liberty Partnership Program, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, just to provide some context. So, excuse me. The Liberty Partnership Program is funded through NYSED, and it's basically a high school dropout prevention program. We work with 7 different schools in 3 different school districts. 4 of them are high schools, 3 of them are middle schools, and we provide 5 different services to all of these students. Academic immersion, which is after-school tutoring, college exploration, doing college field trips to various campuses, career and workforce development, like doing job shadowing days or just exposing them to different careers or using software like Naviance to help guide them, counseling, and parental engagement. We have about 255 students. It's a really new program. Most of the sessions started taking place in January. So we decided to, and here's some of the students. These are some of our middle school students doing a skyscraper project in an art studio at RCC, and they went on to use a 3D printer to recreate some of the models that they were doing. So in this pilot, we wanted to roll out Digication, but not just at the college level, at the high school and middle school level. And a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about is some of the issues that we faced in doing that. So I thought the most important thing was assessing the technology IQ of students and teachers. And I also include teachers in that because everybody has their own level of familiarity with technology. If you have a teacher that is not as comfortable, you kind of want to be conscious and make sure that that teacher isn't paired with a student that also isn't that comfortable. The logistics, developing the concept of ePortfolios first, and then reviewing them in context, and then some guided exploration time, and then reflection at the end. So the first thing that I really, like this is in hindsight, I think is really important is just really figuring out how comfortable everyone is with whatever technology you're going to roll out. How big is the gap between the most savvy student and the least savvy student, and the same for any staff that may be in the room working with students. Thinking about the big picture and then breaking it down. So basically unpacking all the skills necessary to create any portfolio and then targeting each one of those things to make sure that people can do those independently. And some of the examples that are, like I told students, okay, so first thing we're gonna do is upload a selfie onto the desktop, which in itself has a few steps involved in it. Some students did that like within the snap of a finger. Other students really struggled with that. So just by doing these like short little tasks, you can kind of get an idea of where everyone is at. If you want to be like more formal about it, there are a few, like just do some light Googling for like technology IQ. You can find online web IQ tests, and you can use the results from that to sort of think about how you want to group or pair students. It's a quick picture of me. This is me rolling it out to some students, and they were looking at me like I was crazy for a little bit. Oh, I don't want to stay on that picture, but I want to talk about that moment. So I got stuck for a really long time, and there were students who were super savvy. There were kids that could tell me all these different ways of setting up my Facebook privacy and things like that. But the big roadblock we hit was when it was time to just type in the URL. There were like 5 students that just got really stuck on that. And there was a staff member that got really stuck on that too. Just because most people are using apps and they just, from their smartphones, they just find the icon and press it and go. A lot of people aren't, unless like they're using the computer, every day like teachers aren't really typing in URLs. So I found some like weird discrepancies in like what kids were able to do and not do. So the second thing I wanted to think about, or in hindsight, I would like you to think about if you're going to roll out Digication, is logistics. What type of hardware or software is needed? Do you have access to computer labs? Do you have to bring in laptops? Acceptable use policies, et cetera, et cetera. This one was important for me also because I had a lot of E&L students just trying to differentiate or provide any accommodations or modifications for students with different learning profiles. That was really important. And it may be different for whatever your population is, but it's just definitely something you want to consider. What I did was I talked about the concept of ePortfolios before giving them specific examples of them. The reason being is I have one to promote the LPP program, and I felt like if I started off showing them that, then I would have all of these students making ePortfolios that advertise the LPP program, and then I would then kind of cut off their creativity. So I kind of wanted to give the ball to them and just see what all the different uses that they would come up with for it. And so I just talked about the concept of it. Students were asking, is it a blog or is it social media? And so just discussing the differences where those things overlap, but really explaining to them what an ePortfolio is. We watched a few videos about ePortfolios to try to sort of bolster their knowledge of it. And then I gave them some playtime. Like, okay, here's the software, mess around with it. But again, they're high school students, so I couldn't just say, play around, I'll be back in like 45 minutes, let me see what you're gonna do. Because like, who knows what would have happened. But I would give them like a good 10 minutes and give them a task. So it was guided, but I still gave them the room to play around with it a little bit. And the reason why is there are students who don't get a lot of time to do that. They don't have those skills. And just being able to mess around with software they can find out what things are, which parts of it are intuitive, which parts are not. And it sort of kind of gets their creativeness flowing. If I sit there and talk to them about it for 45 minutes, they may forget everything, and then if I only give them 5 minutes to play around with it, they'll be like, far less engaged. This was a huge piece as well, just revisit and reflecting on what they've learned about the software, how to use it. On day one, I had them take screenshots, and that in itself was like a skill, like taking a screenshot of what their ePortfolio looks like, and then go back and revisit it a month later, and then go back and revisit it like at the end of 6 months, and compare that to their day one so that they can see their progress and be a little bit metacognitive about the things that they've learned. But looking back, I feel like that's a big piece of all of this, of rolling this out to middle school and high school students. Because the idea is that one day, some middle schooler will be in college and they'll look back at where their English and reading skills were when they were in the 6th grade and think about how far they've come over the course of their academic life. So just want to thank you guys. I'm going to stop there. I don't know. I think I kind of went over on time. But if anyone has any questions, feel free. Any questions? Yes.
Understand the reflective piece of the portfolio? Did they understand what that process is, or were they looking at you like, what do you mean you want me to talk about my work? Like, did they understand that?
So it wasn't super explicit. Like the way that I've been trying to do this has been through guided exploration. So I would give them like open-ended prompts. I would say, okay, let's take a look. I want everyone to pull up your ePortfolios, your screenshots from January. And then I would say, what do you notice? Compare it to what you see now. What do you notice now? So a lot of students were like just looking at surface differences. Some students did a really great job, and kids were like, ooh, that looks cool, how did you do that? And they're like, oh, okay, well, this is what you do. And they started offering advice on how to do those things. But again, this is a new program. We started in January. So in terms of like data, academic data, we haven't gathered a whole lot to make like a causal relationship between the two. And so that wasn't a huge part of our reflection. Yes?
For the commercial products, when they move on and they leave the institution, do they still have access to that portfolio? Because they won't have access to Blackboard anymore, or Digitation.
That's a good question. We use Digication specifically.
Education provides the access.
I know in Digication, they can link to a private email so that they can have it after they leave. And that's one of the downsides of using, say, Blackboard in the class, because you leave the class, that's it cuts off. You can't get back to the information, which is really frustrating. But I think with many of them, and people, I'm familiar with Digication. I know you can do with that. I don't know about other ePortfolio packages.
We host Mahara ourselves.
Yeah.
And if students want, when they leave, we can change from their login into Mahara using their Active Directory campus account to a special account created in Mahara for them using whatever email they want to log in. Yeah. So
I think that's true most around the board. Most of the packages that I've seen have that ability, I think. Yeah.
But you do want to think about portability of the portfolios and post institution like
Just to elaborate a little bit, at UB, the students are also able to continue their UB email account. And I think the idea is as long as UB is still a Digication campus, they can keep their Digication portfolio, but if we happen to change, then that continues for the student. But it can be exported as HTML and put wherever they would like.
And if you decided to do like Google sites and you're a Google Apps school, they have to create a personal account and assign ownership of that personal account to it, but then they can also continue the site.
Well, that was one of the things that made Google Docs more interesting to me. I was wondering why you were more interested in the free sites than commercial sites.
Because I'm a nerd.
Amen.
And I think it gives you, in some ways, it gives you more control And I also teach a lot of like digital literacy stuff, so it made more sense to me for students to play around in that environment. But at the same time, other instructors were very wary of adding those layers of competency, additional logins, additional, tools to learn how to use and things like that. So it is a trade-off.
And I know we found in Rockland, Martha and I found definitely, I don't know if Genesee's found as well, but the biggest sale is not for the students, it's for the instructors. And sometimes we've had a lot of interest in ePortfolios, and then instructors, I have to learn all this stuff. I'm a little, I have all these other things I'm doing. I don't want to learn all this new technology as well. So that's been our biggest barrier, I think, to getting wider adoption of using ePortfolios in classrooms around the school.
I was wondering if anybody has used the library and librarians as an alternative for learning apps.
And it's on our radar for the fall.
So librarians can teach the education, right? Take the burden off the faculty member of teaching. It's an opportunity for librarians, which they need to take on.
It's a great idea. Yeah.
I'm from Teaching and Learning in Stony Brook, and we have students who teach the workshops.
Yeah.
And they go into the writing classes and they teach the
We've
workshops.
been to
and then-
Stony Brook. I've seen the work of the students there. They're wonderful. Yeah, it's
But we
great.
also have librarians who teach digital storytelling, and so they see education from a different perspective, so it's like a team effort.
And sometimes I think there's some competition between, if you have a Center for Teaching and Learning, instructional designers and technologists, they want to be the ones to teach the apps. And the librarians don't kind of partner with them, and it's like a turf battle. It could be.
Yes.
So for your middle school and high school students, what types of items did you encourage them to put into those ePortfolios? Is it like, so that's an introduction to them on this whole concept. So what were the types of things you recommend they get to say?
So basically when I moved from concept to context, that was kind of early on before letting them, explore with it themselves. I told them that, talk to them about the different ways that they could use it. They could use it for just archiving their own progress, their own academic progress. And I talked about how I was able to find an old report card of mine from like the 2nd grade and how amazing that was, but most people don't have that opportunity anymore. So I told them that they could just, if they did really well on a school paper or a project, they could upload it onto their ePortfolio. But then I also talked about finding and creating digital media that represents them. And I try to connect that to finding a job or getting into college, or even like resumes, where a resume is a piece of paper that is two-dimensional, it doesn't really come to life. Whereas if you really want to give someone an idea of who you are as a person and market yourself, then you put things that you feel represent you. And so I gave them those two options. I was like, find something that you think represents you. And then we had one student that ran track, and he had like all these different track videos. And I made the connection, like, all right, well, maybe you can use this when you're applying to this school for, this particular program. And then we had other students putting in, spelling quizzes and stuff like that.
Great, so they really got the idea.
I hope so. I feel like the seed was planted. Like, they understood. Like, I just tried to keep the prompt simple, and they understood what I asked them to do. But like, the biggest thing was just making those connections from, like, how does this connect to college, or how does this connect to even a job, which were like bigger leaps that were harder to explain to them.
And so are you going to track the portfolios? Will you still have these same students year by year?
Yeah, they'll be moving up into following grades, and they'll still have access to their ePortfolios. So we will have that data. I feel like we're out of time. Thank you, guys.